Why do we look different today, and why was humankind born darker complected? Most likely, you're going to understand all of this, and it's not a matter of beauty or aesthetics. Two papal decrees were issued, Dum Diversus or Dum Diversus, I prefer to call it Dum, formally authorizing the seizure of non-Christian lands and the enslavement of their peoples, granting rulers the right to invade, to search out, to capture, to vanquish, and to subdue, and reduce any persons to perpetual slavery. This is literally the language. All right, welcome back to the Moral Compass podcast. My name is Shara and I am your host. Now, I want to remind you that the Moral Compass is an educational podcast. So I am very much focused on giving you information that you may not have already known of. It's on the internet. Most of what I'm able to find, you're probably going to be able to find as well. Some of what I research comes out of books, but this is kind of a research heavy podcast at times. Once in a while, and if I do provide a short, it's going to be off the cuff. Our conversations with guests are also mostly off the cuff, them sharing their expertise and so on. So I want to, before I get into today's topic, remind you about what it is that we're going to be talking about in our overall mission. Last week, we left off with talking about what today's conversation was going to be about, or actually, I should say, the next episode. This episode is actually going to be broken up into 3 parts. I promise you it wasn't clickbait. I am going to get it out to you in a quicker amount of time than I normally would have. Typically, I'm going to deliver podcasts once a week, and then you might see some shorts and other commentary, but since this is kind of chock full of information, I want to make sure that you're able to get all this information and not be completely loaded with info, because it's a lot. Anyways, so this is a research heavy podcast at times. Sometimes it's off the cuff. So sometimes I have conversation. I just share my thoughts and opinions. I always try to be responsible with the things that I say and how I say them. And sometimes it's actually going to be very research heavy. Get your pen and paper out, right? Meaning that I'm providing you with facts, right? Things that you're going to want to confirm on your own. This is a conversation I want to have with the public. I want us to become moral together. I'm not going to be one of these podcasters that are sitting on my high horse with all of the answers and solutions and don't question my word. I'm presenting information to you, especially when I say that this is going to be an educational episode or a research heavy episode. I'm presenting information that I don't mind you challenging me on. Obviously, if you're just wanting to be annoying and you say really rude things or you're being disrespectful just for the sake of, I'll just ignore you because I know how to deal with toxic people. You ignore them. But if you actually have sincere questions or disagreements, please drop a comment or you can shoot me an email at shara@livemoral.com. So before we get into our conversation today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on anything, any good conversation. Now, this is a question I feel needs to be answered before we really dig into the topic of racial identity. And that is, what does it have to do with morality, right? You might be thinking, this is a podcast about morality, yet she's focusing on race, Blacks, and Jews. How does that even make sense? I'm dedicating an entire season to tackling issues related to these communities and these identities. And you're probably thinking, what a niche thing to do and a great way to isolate the rest of the world from your little, Black Power mission. Okay, number one, this is not a Black Power podcast. Really, pride should be reserved for accomplishments. And your race is not an accomplishment. You were just born into it. It's not anything you achieved or gained. It's just is what it is. So I don't want to say that I'm proud to be Black, just as I wouldn't want to hear someone obnoxiously say they're proud to be white or proud to be this or that. There's nothing to be proud of, meaning I'd rather say I am content, I am happy, I'm okay, I am pleased to be Black, as in I accept me, I accept my race, I accept my my melanin. I am not ashamed, really, is what I'm getting at. So no one, I don't care if you're Black, white, Hispanic, this, that, whatever these racially constructed terms are that you identify with, you don't need to be proud of it because you didn't achieve it, but you can be comfortable in your skin and you should know there's nothing to be ashamed of. So if that gives you any insight into the type of message I am sharing with the Black community at large, which is what I consider my community, you're welcome. Okay, so now I'm going to explain what all of these things have to do with morality. Okay, so these things are frameworks that have helped to kind of construct the world that we live in. As much as these topics can be very tedious, triggering, and even provocative to some people, especially when the person presenting the message wants to race bait or create tension between people, we have to be mature in understanding that racial constructs interfered with the framework that we have today. And so to deny it or pretend like it's a long gone thing and that these things no longer are in effect is delusional. Number one, every time you go on a job interview, they still ask you, what is your race? They ask you if you're black, they ask you if you're white. And those are kind of your options. And then they ask you if you're Hispanic. So those are the only races. And then you can be, if you're black or you're white, are you of Hispanic heritage or not? There's a lot more they're digging for, they're fishing for. And it definitely depends on who's asking the question. They could be using this as a way to determine whether or not this candidate might be worth their time in interviewing. If it's someone who is, maybe working for greater powers, the Hispanic, non-Hispanic question might be there for a different reason. Again, so that's what I'm not going to get into today. I think it's an absolute BS construct, but it's fine. We're not going to talk about that today. But it is very much a part of our application processes. Whether you're going for citizenship, whether you're going for a job, these are the questions that are asked. Remember, they're not asking what is your ethnicity. So they're not asking what is your culture and your worldview and, the things that shape you. They're literally asking, what color is your skin? What lineage do you come from, so that they can kind of paint a visual identification of who you might be. And that's very important, and it's something that you cannot deny unless you are uneducated about this subject. And that's why you're here. So I'm going to enlighten you. Now, every moral issue that we face today, whether it's division or prejudice or corruption, it all stems from damage to this framework. And it's rooted in a lot of ignorance, it's rooted in a lot of prejudice, superiority complexes and inferiority complexes, and self-centeredness, all the things like ego that actually break down who people are. To restore morality, we have to repair the foundation of how we think, and that's why we're having this conversation. So if you know anything about me, you might know that there was one point that I attempted conversion to Judaism, but I am actually very irreligious, meaning that I don't have rites or rituals in my lifestyle. I do believe that there is a creator and a supreme being in the world, and I believe that there are moral codes that we are designed to live by. But I'm not religious. However, I do actually learn or have learned from rabbis in the past, and I continue to lean on a lot of Jewish wisdom because in all of my years of studying various different religions, from Christianity, which is the religion I was raised in, to Judaism, and in between that point, I studied a little bit of Islam and other smaller, lesser known world religions, and I found Judaism to be kind of the most powerful. So, and the most meaningful and broad in terms of its usefulness in the world. And so I do enjoy referencing Jewish sources and wisdom. Now, again, if you're not religious or, you're not inclined to feel that way, take what you need and leave the rest. So if it doesn't resonate with you conscientiously, then ignore it. But that's usually why I lean on a lot of Jewish wisdom. That said, that's also the reason that many people in the world have leaned on Jewish wisdom, because Judaism kind of doesn't demand that you have to be Jewish to lean on its wisdom. It's kind of different in that way, but we'll get into that in the second or third part of this podcast. So this episode. So let's begin with the origin. Primordial man, the first man, was born under the African sun. And if you know anything about genetics, you will understand that means that he was melanated. And if you don't believe this, you think that Adam and Eve were two Caucasian looking people with very straight hair as they sat along equatorial lines, even if you believe they were in the northern part of Africa, then you don't really know how melanin and genetics work. So from a biblical view, this land is often associated, and that's the land of Africa, with what's considered Edenic territory, and that would be territory that was flowing through ancient Kush and Mesopotamia. From an anthropological lens, there's genetic evidence traced through what scientists call mitochondrial ancestry. Why do we look different today, and why was humankind born darker complected, most likely also with kinkier hair? You're going to understand all of this, and it's not a matter of beauty or aesthetics. So color unlocked from dark to light then, and not the reverse. The original man must have carried a deeper complexion, which is actually a design for protection. Modern research supports this, that the earliest humans possessed high melanin levels as an adaptation to intense equatorial ultraviolet radiation. So this dark baseline protected against folate loss and DNA damage. And as populations migrated into regions with lower UV exposure, natural selection favored lighter pigmentation. Why? To enable vitamin D production. So how did environment shape the human form? Now, this is going to be a fun learn for those of you who like to learn new information. All right, get your pen and paper out and let's start writing. Why we look different is kind of a straightforward biology. Long ago, our shared ancestors lived in Africa under fierce sunlight. So, as I said, their skin produced abundant melanin, shielding DNA from ultraviolet damage and protecting folate. But as some groups migrated north into cooler, dimmer climates, sunlight weakened, and over generations, people with lighter complexions thrived because light skin allows more vitamin D to synthesize in low UV conditions. It was never about beauty or appearance. It was biology finding geographical balance. Between the deepest and the lightest tones lies an entire spectrum written by geography. In North and East Africa, Arabia, and Persia, you often see cool brown skin with straight, dark hair and enough melanin for UV protection in the desert sun, and hair that sheds heat efficiently and resists matting in arid, sandy winds. So, hair on people that are typically in these regions of the world might be a little bit more voluminous, though more straight in texture. And that allowed them to have just enough lift from the scalp while also allowing protection, right? That again, darker colors are act as kind of a shield or a barrier from the sun. Think about it like pulling down shades in your car or in your home to kind of shield from direct sunlight. That's what melanin does. And the same when it comes to hair color. It acts as a protectant. Around the Mediterranean and into South Asia, olive to copper hues balance folate protection with vitamin D synthesis across mixed UV levels on coast and peninsulas. In East Asia and parts of Central Asia, you now see semi-pale skin with golden undertones, and it appears alongside eyes with an epicanthic fold. This is because it helps to reduce glare and shield against wind and cold, including snow glare. I haven't done my full research on the appearance of Vikings, but I have been informed by other researchers. Again, I only present to you what is absolutely verifiable and confirmed to be a fact, but I've heard other researchers say that the Vikings may have looked more like Inuits in terms of eye constructs having that epicanthic fold, right, in order to protect from the wind. The original Vikings may not have looked like the blonde hair, bright-eyed, Caucasians that we imagine today. Although Europe was also cold, it just wouldn't have been that as steeply cold as areas like Norway and Finland and Iceland. And as much as they may have had very pale skin and even lighter hair, they may have had epicanthic folds in their eyes and looked like a mix between Asian and Caucasian. Now, in Northern Europe, you also get very pale skin tones that favored rapid vitamin D synthesis. So again, that's that region of Norway and Finland, and depending on how cold it got, how windy it was, the epicanthic fold of the eye may have presented differently. But that's where you're going to get the palest skin tones and the most blonde hair, because blonde hair is really a hair that lacks melanin. It's the same case for blue eyes. Blue eyes are essentially unmelanated eyes. Color is chemistry. So specialized cells called melanocytes make melanin using genes such as MC1R, TYR, and SLC24A5. Sunlight triggers those cells to release more pigment, which is a natural sunscreen. In the short term, we call it tanning. Over the long term, it becomes an inherited adaptation. So, whether you believe humanity unfolded over many generations or within a shorter creation based timeline, the mechanism is the same. Okay, environment pressure changes gene frequency until the protection matches the climate. All right, now we're going to get into something also a little bit fun. At least it was fun for me to research and learn. Climate and geography help to shape not only our hair, which we generally touched on, but I really want to dig into it for you to understand. But we've talked about skin color, but also our hands, our feet, like a lot of details adjust depending on where you migrated to in the world. Research, be curious, ask questions. When something doesn't seem right, when something doesn't seem fair, when something doesn't seem logical, simply take a moment and think. And when you do that, you'll be able to discover the same things that I am able to discover. It's not because I have been blessed by with some level of wisdom that you have no access to. It's just simply I am willing to think and challenge my preconceptions. Form follows function across features. So hair texture depends on follicle shape and keratin related genes such as EDAR and KRT71. Tightly coiled hair evolved near the equator to shade the scalp and release heat. Think about it as being more like a sponge in a way, in that it is lifting away from the head instead of like straight hair laying flat in layers, very tight layers, directly onto the scalp. So, what we call kinky hair is simply hair that is fluffy and able to lift away from the scalp. And again, that is to allow for shading of the scalp, but while releasing heat in warmer climates. Straighter hair, on the other hand, in colder regions, again, it lays one strand on top of the other very densely and traps warmth. I have locks, and my locks can hold water for a very long time. Okay, it's not as, and then again, I think the more damage and the older they get, they hold on, they retain water. The healthier they are, natural black hair, especially if you're getting into more kinkier textures, that hair is going to, allow for water to be released in a reasonable amount of time. Now, eye color like blue or eventually green appears through reduced melanin in the iris and genetic drift. There was no special vision or superpowers as a result of having it. There was no genetic superiority. In fact, human beings are 99.9% exactly alike. And none of them have to do with our intellectual abilities or anything like that. Broad noses in humid warmth move air freely, and it aids in heat and moisture exchange. So think about broad noses are closer to the face, allowing oxygen to hit the lungs. Again, you're going to be in environments that are very rich and fertile. People that are darker complected, whether they're Aboriginal, African, or something else, having that climate allows for a lot of activity because there's so much abundance of resources. Also, there's a fun discovery I'm going to share with you guys about different cultural advancements based on race as well. Narrower nose bridges and narrower nostrils. And there is an actual biological function here. What they are doing is allowing air to come through the nostrils and having a longer channel to warm the air before it hits the lungs. So you can imagine if someone is actually designed with ancestral phenotypes that are similar to African, they are probably going to be less comfortable in colder regions. Why? Because we literally have permanent shades drawn even if we're from these regions of the world. And I'm going to explain to you why today we see people kind of, taking a pause on evolution. Fuller lips in warm regions also help to dissipate heat. They also acted as tactile sensory, so they were able to feel potentially insects and broader surface, a lot more sensitivity, and of course, dispensing heat. These are all features of broader lips, which has everything to do with understanding the environment that they were in able to be around, a insect rich, foliage rich, wildlife rich environment. They need to be able to have a lot more sensitivity. Thinner lips actually conserve warmth in cold air. Okay, so Having bigger lips in cold temperature is going to make you more susceptible to having chapped lips. So, having thinner lips was kind of almost a way of protecting you from the weather. Not kind of, is. And of course, sexual selection and hormones reinforce shapes within particular regions of the world that signaled health or warmth or uniqueness, and that helped to amplify what survival first designed. The same adaptive logic appears in our hands and our feet. So, palms and soles, this is a difference. I want to point this out when it comes to the color of your hands and feet. You might be wondering, yeah, I call bull because how come black people have more melanin on one side of their hand but not on the other side? Are you saying that they come out in the world and they walk around like this? No, definitely not. But there again is a scientific and evolutionary reason for this. In fact, when it comes to both black and white people and every shade in between, even though these terms are really polarizing constructs because no one is actually black or white, we've seen people very dark, and if you're not familiar with black people, you will call them black. And people hit their pictures with a lot of exaggerated filters, especially when they take a lot of pleasure in being melanated. But melanated people are typically at the dark shades and light shades of browns. When it comes to unmelanated people, we're thinking gold if in the form of tanning and being extremely pale. If you are pale to the point of being white, you're probably lifeless, and that is no bueno, okay? You're probably sick or on the verge of saying goodnight. So our palms and soles are lighter, not mainly because they see less sun, but because they are considered glabrous skin, engineered for grip and load. They're thicker, hairless, densely innervated, and governed by local signals, including DKK1, that dial down melanocyte activity so those surfaces produce less pigment and further look pale because the thick outer layer scatters light. Feet vary within ancestry and terrain, so in many African lineages, there are flatter arches and wider feet to distribute weight and stabilize movement on fertile and softer, hotter ground. In colder or rockier regions of Europe and Asia, having higher arches and narrower, even smaller feet act like springs for long travel and fit coverings that conserve heat. So even toe lengths differ by population, and it's dependent on their tasks. So a shorter middle toe can reduce the muscular energy of running and walking, while a relatively longer second toe can aid balance on uneven or steep terrain. And I believe that's referred to as Morton's toe. I'll double check and put the right word in the video. Wider toe splay improves grip and climbing, whereas compact toes conserve energy for distance traveling. None of this signals worth, all of it signals function. All right, now I want to talk about, are there any parallels in any other created beings, or is it just humankind that follow these kind of evolutionary patterns? The answer is that this is even visible in the animal kingdom. Animal parallels make the pattern obvious. Cold climate mammals like Arctic foxes and wolves have longer nasal passages that warm and moisten air before it reaches the lungs, just as humans in frigid regions evolved longer and narrower noses. Warmer climate mammals tend toward broader, shorter snouts that move air quickly and release heat. Big cats in tropical regions and primates have the shortest, almost the shortest of all. They share broad nose solution oriented genetics with equatorial human groups whose wider nostrils enhance oxygen flow and cooling efficiencies. Huskies are native Arctic landrace dogs that naturally evolved in Siberia and were later refined by the Chukchi people. As humans migrated, they carried animals, dogs, sheep, goats, horses, and other animals well beyond their native climates. So, domestication, interbreeding, and relocation softened strict geographic adaptations in animals, much as heating, clothing, medicine have softened our own. So, our next question is, well, then how come we have darker complected people that are born and raised after a couple of generations and still remain darker complected with more African phenotypes in northern regions of the world? And why do we have people like South Africans that are, pale complected, blonde hair, blue eyes, living in South Africa? That doesn't make sense, right? Okay, well, the truth is that today our evolution has largely paused, not because the body forgot how to change, but because technology now changes our environment faster than our genes can or even need to. We have heating, we have cooling, we have medicine, and we have mobility. So regional, isolation is rare, although you will see that people who are considered indigenous to an area tend to demonstrate the features that we are describing from those regions of the world. If you come from a lineage of people that have mixed all different types of races, and by race I am simply referring to phenotype and color, not culture, not ethnicity, not value system, not intellect, simply color and phenotype for the purposes of function. Over the years, we have mixed so much so that it kind of has slowed down the evolutionary process, in addition to technology saying, nothing to see here, no need to make adjustments. The human palette that we have now is simply almost like ancestral art. It really just indicates the biological echoes of our geography rather than some ongoing adaptation. In the 15th century, the Catholic Church granted Europe's monarchs divine permission to divide the world and its people under Pope Nicholas V. Two papal decrees were issued, Dum Diversas, or Dum Diversas, I prefer to call it Dum, and Romanos Pontifex in 1452 and 1455. These were formally authorizing the seizure of non-Christian lands and the enslavement of their peoples, granting rulers the right to invade, to search out, to capture, to vanquish, and to subdue, and reduce any persons to perpetual slavery. This is literally the language. Religion became law and law became license, and the spiritual political cornerstone helped set the stage for the transatlantic slave trade. Beneath these decrees sat an older scaffold, however, and that is the Great Chain of Being. This Great Chain of Being was basically a ladder placing God and the angels at the top, then kings, then commoners, then animals, and then matter. As European expansion encountered new people, color was stitched into that ladder. So lighter was nearer to the divine and darker was nearer to the animal. This is literally how racial constructs began. Barbarism itself was selective. For example, Vikings, self-identified pagans notorious for violence, were retroactively absorbed into white Christendom through conversion and memory, while many darker, less warlike peoples were labeled savages, go figure. In the 18th century, taxonomy rebranded hierarchy as science. So people like Linnaeus mapped continental types and temperaments, while Kant and Blumenbach merged complexion with moral worth and enlightenment, turning skin tone into a measure of civilization. Episodes, I will catch you next week on that. Please like and subscribe, comment, do all the fun things that is going to help these videos to rise in the organic algorithm of YouTube. I would really appreciate it. I promise we are going to get to the conversation on the protocols of the elders of Zion, where that comes into play. A lot of Jewish conspiracies that are out there. What does the Jewish community have to do with any of this? So in our next couple of episodes, you will be hearing a little bit more about that, how that came into being. We'll talk the next time about Christian and Muslim influence on the world's moral compass and the framework that has helped to distort our moral compass or our pro-social inclinations, which is what morality is. It's going to be a great next couple of episodes, and these really are one episode, but I'm breaking it up into 3 parts because there's so much information that I don't want to overwhelm you with in only one episode. Thank you for watching The Moral Compass.